If I told you the media was biased against Donald Trump, your reaction would depend on which tribe you're in. Conservatives and Trump supporters are going to say, well, duh, what else is new? And the left is going to say, that's just silly. But the reality is, they really are biased against Trump. Now, this doesn't take away anything from Trump being a dangerous media mastermind. That is a quote from CNN, not from me. They've said Trump, he plays the media, he knows what he's doing. But the media is biased against Trump. Trump plays them up. He does it on purpose because it distracts from bigger issues. Yesterday, I did a video about Trump winning a Supreme Court ruling which will allow moving forward on funding the border wall. In it, I mentioned Trump started tweeting about Baltimore and Elijah Cummings and triggered this huge wave of rage. And here we are, once again, in a news cycle based on Trump tweeting. But here's what I'm going to do today. You may have seen many of the tweets. You may have seen what Trump said. You may have seen some of the articles. Today, I want to go through something I find very interesting. The bias against Trump and the ignoring of the same thing from Bernie Sanders. Let me rephrase it. That's kind of weird. The media will take something Trump says and go to town. 24/7, Trump is bad, bad, bad. Bernie Sanders will say something and they'll say, yeah, so what, whatever. When Trump tweeted about Baltimore, people called it a race-driven, I don't know how to describe it. They were saying that even though Trump said nothing about race, he was implying it because he was using the words like infested and things like that. Bernie Sanders has said similar things, albeit not as bombastic, but very critical of Baltimore. People immediately started saying, hey, remember when Bernie Sanders says Baltimore was like a third world country? How come no one called him out for that? But it's worse. I actually have many, many stories that I can pull up showing Bernie Sanders and Trump are very, very similar. There are estimates that in the 2016 election, around 12 to 18% of Bernie voters voted for Trump. And now you're going to see why. As I explain to you how the media will go after Trump and accuse him of being the worst possible and ignore Bernie doing similar things. Now, admittedly, I'll say this. Look, Trump is definitely bombastic, and he definitely tries to be more aggressive than Bernie does. Bernie will pull back when confronted and try and, try and bow to the media. Trump doesn't. So I think the bias more has to do with that. Even though Bernie has said offensive things, they don't care because when challenged, Bernie will be like, oh, no. And he'll try and apologize for it. Trump, not so much. So I have this story from The Hill. Trump doubles down on attacks against Cummings and Baltimore district. But before we get started getting into all this and the bias, make sure you head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There's a PayPal option, a crypto option, a physical address. But of course, share this video if you think it's important because YouTube has deranked independent political commentary. And the only way this channel grows now is if you share it because you think it's something people should hear. And if you think people shouldn't hear it, don't share it. And then comment below as to why you think no one should hear anything I have to say. I'm kidding. Let's read the news. The first story, the update from today. Trump is doubling down, they say. President Trump doubled down his attacks against Rep. Elijah Cummings and his Baltimore congressional district, saying that it's sad that the longtime congressman has done so little for the city he represents and accusing Democrats of playing the race card. So sad that Elijah Cummings has been able to do so little for the people of Baltimore. I'll just read it. Statistically, Baltimore ranks last in almost every major category. Cummings has done nothing but milk Baltimore dry, but the public is getting wise to the bad job that he is doing. Trump did not expand on what statistics he was referring to. He defended his position again early Sunday, saying there is nothing wrong with pointing out that Cummings has done a very poor job. The Democrats always play the race card, when in fact, they have done so little for our nation's great African-American people. Elijah Cummings has failed badly. I agree. There is absolutely nothing wrong with Trump calling out a bad place. Baltimore is not one of the best places in this country. I believe it has the highest per capita homicide rate. So it does have its issues. Just because Trump is talking about this doesn't mean other places aren't worse. And I will also point out many of the people responded saying, Kentucky is really, really bad. Where's Mitch McConnell? Pointing out that, look, there are a lot of places that are bad. Trump obviously takes things on tribal lines like most people do. So when I see him tweet about this, I say, yes, it's politics. What else is new? But the media, the media turns into the biggest news cycle ever. Now, I believe Trump knows this. I believe he has to have known it by now, that no matter what he does, they're going to go nuts. And what do we have? Two big stories, his win on the border wall and his safe third country agreement with Guatemala. These are huge moves that will benefit Trump towards immigration policy. But what do we get entangled in? Trump tweeted again. Well, look, the big news was yesterday. I covered it. So I want to dive into this and show the hypocrisy. how they will ignore what Bernie says, admitting, Bernie is bombastic, but I still think there's a double standard. They'll ignore what Bernie says and slam Trump. So first, I'm not going to read through all these, but I'm going to show some of the tweets Trump has put out. He says, please explain to Nancy Pelosi, who was recently called racist by her own party, that there is nothing wrong with bringing out the very obvious fact that Congressman Elijah Cummings has done a very poor job for his district. He says, now we have the lowest unemployment in history for the black community. Then we have this other tweet here. I'm looking for the one where he said it was rat infested and disgusting. And that was the one where they used to claim that his language was meant to be, played on racial lines because he said it was infested, crime infested. But he did say no human being would want to live there. So where did the big news come from? Well, actually, we'll get to it. It's the Victor Blackwell thing. But I want to highlight very quickly that Trump has then retweeted these videos. This one from Kim K. Baltimore. She says, more trash, more concerned residents. People live in the home with the silver van. This is Rep. Cummings' district. This has nothing to do with race. Let us all pray the city removes the trash and installs cameras to catch individuals dumping on this property. So we have videos from Kimberly Classic of Baltimore. Millions of views now showing, yes, Baltimore is in dire straits and they need help. What does the media do? They grandstand on mortal grounds. Look, I believe you could approach this with, here's how I'd say it. Trump is targeting Elijah Cummings' district because Elijah Cummings has targeted Border Patrol. That's my opinion. And I think it's fair to point out that his district is not faring too well, but it's also important to point out there are many other districts as well. It's fair for Trump to point out the problems, and just because he's called out one problem doesn't mean other problems don't exist. In fact, that's quite literally the Black Lives Matter argument. During Ferguson and Black Lives Matter, I was on the ground, a comic was going viral that showed houses on fire. One with a small fire and one with a big fire. And the point they were making was that the black community needs more help than the white community when it comes to police brutality. That doesn't mean they're dismissing the problems of the white community. The point is the narrative now flips when Trump points out it is, in fact, a black community that needs help. But of course, the narrative is more about smearing Trump. So we're going to get to all the weird and wild that's going on. Now, I'm going to do this as an aside for two reasons. This next story I want to mention. This is from the Daily News. Trump's NYC eateries written up for live mice, other critical health code violations in recent months. I want to highlight this for two reasons. The first, this story is from a while ago, but many people are sharing it now for the obvious reason. That is, Trump calling a place rat infested. But so this is getting a lot of traction. Once again, it's from February. But hey, it's look, just because Trump is pointing out Baltimore doesn't mean you can't point out his restaurants. It doesn't mean Baltimore is doing good. It doesn't take away from Trump's criticism. It just means, great, I'll criticize Trump too. I don't think he's managing the day-to-day operations of his businesses, but I also kind of feel like Elijah Cummings isn't managing his own community enough either. They can both be criticized. Two things can be true. So by all means, criticize Trump all day and night. It does nothing to take away from the fact that Trump isn't wrong. Baltimore has problems. We can then say, sure, so does Trump's eateries. Great, fix them both. I hate this argument. Look, whataboutism can make sense in some capacities for some arguments, right? What about X? Fine. But not in the effort to dismiss the initial criticisms. Where are the people saying, you're right, Baltimore is bad? No, they're saying, aha, well, Trump's a bigot and so in his restaurants aren't good either. So who is he to talk? Well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Even if the pot and the kettle are both black, they can still point to each other and say, hey, it's time to get cleaned up, right? Let's move on. The next story I have has to do with why people think Trump's tweets are bigoted on racial lines. Well, according to this poll from Rasmussen, 32% of Democrats say any white criticism of politicians of color is racist. Well, there you go. So that explains that. Moving forward, this is the Victor Blackwell story, which I don't want to spend too much time on. I'm going to go through each of these things I've pulled up, but trust me, we're going to get to the Bernie Sanders stuff. That's the crux of what this video is going to be about. I don't know why I criticized this yesterday, so I wanted to re-highlight it because it really pushed this story forward. CNN putting a guy on camera who cries, I don't think it's the right thing to do. Now, the big update is that yesterday the Baltimore Sun criticized Donald Trump, saying, better to have a few rats than to be one. The thing that's funny about this is that they're saying they have rats, like admitting you have a rat problem to own Trump. Okay, fine. But let's get to the real issue here with the Baltimore Sun. For one, they do have a ton of articles about Baltimore and Trump's comments. Of course they would. I'm not concerned about that. I'm concerned about what Bernie Sanders said, because now we're going to talk about the double standard. In 2016, Bernie Sanders tweeted, residents of Baltimore's poorest boroughs have lifespans shorter than people living under dictatorship in North Korea. That is a disgrace. I don't disagree. Was there media outrage when Bernie says this? No. Granted, it's not the same thing. Trump was very bombastic and talked about rats and everything. But okay, let's move on. Bernie Sanders likens West Baltimore to third world country in 2015. Once again, did we see any great outrage? Was there big press? No, not really. No one really cared. And Bernie was running for president at the time. I believe he was running for president around. I mean, that's why they probably started talking about it. But yes, Bernie has been very critical. This is just, I shouldn't have this one open. This is a rehashing of the same story from Baltimore, the Baltimore Sun. But now let's get into Bernie Sanders is very similar to Donald Trump without the media criticism. And you can very well say it's because Bernie is more polite. Fine. It doesn't take away from the principle of the issue. If Trump says Baltimore is, filthy and rat infested with crime, and Bernie Sanders says people are living less than under North Korea and it's a third world country, it's similar criticism, but one gets ignored. Why? Because phrasing was better? I guess. The problem then, though, then comes to be people ignoring the actual problems of Baltimore because they're more concerned about Trump being mean about it. So again, I will say Bernie is more polite. Fine, Trump is more bombastic, but we still have some examples to go through that kind of lend some evidence here. In this story from 2015, Bernie Sanders tells Jorge Ramos he absolutely can beat Hillary Clinton. Now, that's not what's important. What's important is that Jorge Ramos asked him about how he sounds like Donald Trump. He says, "You were recently asked about open borders, and you said it was a right-wing idea, that it would make everybody poor in America. But one article said that you sounded like Donald Trump." Bernie responded, "That's, this is." Jorge Ramos says, "But that suggestion that immigrants would take jobs away from Americans." No, Bernie responds. "We have to be very careful about this one. Yes, we have to. The point here is, I'm starting light. But even Jorge Ramos has said, you've been criticized for sounding like Donald Trump." He has, and I have many examples. Where's the criticism? Now again, I want to make sure I'm very clear. Bernie pulls back right away and says, no, okay. I'm just saying, we gotta, he tries to walk it back and not be as bombastic. Trump, on the other hand, says, nah, get out of here, you're fake news. And they take it personally. As Jon Stewart said, they're ego-driven. So Bernie is playing it right. Let's move on. Here's Real Clear Politics, March 6, 2016. Sanders echoes Trump at debate versus Hillary. How stupid are these trade policies? Just another story where Bernie Sanders sounds a lot like Donald Trump. You're beginning to see why people who voted for Bernie then moved on to vote for Trump. Here's the next story. NPR, 5 ways Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump are more alike than you think. I'm not going to go through it. I'm just showing you once again, February 8th, 2016, comparisons between Trump and Bernie. And they were both populists. They both fought against trade agreements. They both called out bad immigration policy. Bernie still does to this day. And you can see that there were similarities between the two. Where is the media slamming Bernie Sanders? Don't worry, I got a great example for you coming up. Here's a story from this April. Bernie Sanders says U.S. can't have open borders because poor people will come from all over the world. Once again, sounding an awful lot like Donald Trump. No criticism. Sure, Bernie's more polite. But the criticism about Trump isn't often about the fact that he's not being polite. It's about the substance of what he tweeted. So here's what I'm saying. Because Trump is mean, they act like his argument is wrong. I do believe to an extent Trump does it on purpose, because then when regular people enter the conversation, they look around and say, wait, hold on, Baltimore is kind of messed up. What are you saying Trump was wrong about this? Yes. That's basically what Victor Blackwell was saying on CNN. He's like, you're saying no human would want to live there? Well, I grew up there. Okay. Trump was being bombastic, hyperbolic, but now it sounds like you're arguing the substance as opposed to the character. Bernie's substance is very similar to Trump's substance. He says open borders are bad because too many poor people come. Trump, I don't even think Trump has said something to that effect. Trump has said no to the criminals. Bernie straight out called out poor people. Well, hold on. Shouldn't we be calling out Bernie because poor people need our help? Well, socialists did. They did, but for the most part, no, there's no media calling out Bernie Sanders, condemning poor people to the worst parts of the world. How dare he? We have people from Africa flying to Brazil, coming up through the southern border to the U.S., and the media calls out Trump as being kind of nuts for saying it's a problem. But Trump is mostly concerned, most of his conversations is focused on MS-13 and other gangs and crime. Bernie Sanders actually called out poor people. But again, Trump is bombastic. They don't like him. We get it. Now let's get to the big juicy part. Here's the best one. This is from PolitiFact. And boy, you're going to love this. Donald Trump said on Friday, June 10th, 2016 in a speech that the unemployment rate for African American youth is 59%. PolitiFact ruled this to be mostly false. They go on to say that although Trump did have a statistic that showed it would be 58.5%, it's not really how unemployment is calculated, so it's mostly not true. Interesting. What happened when Bernie Sanders made a very similar claim? Bernie Sanders said that African American kids are unemployed or underemployed to the tune of 51%. Well, that was mostly true, even though Bernie Sanders wasn't using the same standard statistics people use for unemployment. He was using a special study. They mentioned Sanders' camp pointed us to research published in June 2015 by the Economic Policy Institute, a left-of-center think tank. The numbers in the report match what Sanders said at the debate. Whoa, hold on. Donald Trump also had, look, they said, the Bureau said the unemployment, they were talking about the Bureau of Labor Statistics called the unemployment population ratio. Trump absolutely was citing real stats. But because it was the wrong stats, they said it was false. When Bernie Sanders cited a study, which was the wrong stats, they said it was mostly true. Okay, hold on. Maybe it's because they trust the left of center think tank more than, what was the other organization? Trump comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics called, so you have the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They said that's not true. That's the wrong stat. Bernie used a think tank. That is okay. Okay, fine. Let's throw this one out. Maybe you're saying, you know what, Tim? Maybe they just don't trust the Bureau of Labor Statistics, how they framed it. Maybe this is not an example of bias against Trump. Maybe they're just saying there's nuance here. Okay, I'm hearing you. Except you'd be wrong. Because when the RNC used the exact same study to make a similar point, over the past 8 years, black youth unemployment is up. Using the same study, it was labeled mostly false. The Bernie Sanders story says, the Institute didn't just look at employment status for people between the ages of 17 and 20. It limited its reach to high school graduates who were not enrolled in further schooling. And 2, EPI counted not only unemployed workers, but also those who are working part-time due to the weakness of the economy and those who are marginally attached to the labor force. And interestingly, when they claimed the Republicans were mostly false, they cite the exact same research. The RNC is cherry-picking and misinterpreting old research by the Liberal Economic Policy Institute, specifically a chart that tracked the high school graduates aged 17 to 20 who are not enrolled in further schooling. According to the chart, the rate rose from 44.8% in January to 51.3% in March 2015. But unemployment is not underemployment. Well, hold on. Didn't you just say that Bernie was right when he said, okay, I'll give them this one. Bernie said unemployed or underemployed. I think it's fair to point out, I'm not trying to accuse them of wrongdoing. Maybe they're basing this simply on the fact that Bernie also added the word underemployed. But I think you can at least see there is a potential for bias. When Trump and Bernie do a similar thing, Trump cites the Bureau of Labor Statistics with actual data. He rounded up by 0.5%. They say it's mostly false. Bernie used a different study that was left of center and mostly true. It sounds to me like, in the end, Bernie Sanders is ignored and Trump is condemned. Now, I want to make sure I reiterate to a great degree. Bernie is not the president. He is a politician. So there is scrutiny to point at in Trump's direction. However, like I mentioned, they turn the criticism towards Trump, it's the substance of his tweets, not the character of his tweets. In which case, if we were going to judge, Trump on policy and substance and Bernie the same way, it's not happening in the media. But let's move on for this. There's a couple more stories to go through. How about this one? Sanders, joined by Rust Belt Democrats, praises Trump for nixing TPP. Well, good on Bernie Sanders. It's a principled move, I gotta say. But where was the condemnation when in 2017, Bernie Sanders actually praised Trump? The point I'm trying to say is, there are numerous stories we've seen over the years where Bernie and Trump are very similar. I'm not saying this is bad for either of them, just that the media doesn't care when Bernie says something like this and even praises the president for his plans. Granted, nixing TPP is not the same as criticizing a jurisdiction, but I don't see in the end how because Trump was bombastic and talking about rats and crime, that makes him a bigot. It just means he's bombastic and mean. It doesn't mean what he's saying is wrong. In fact, many people are coming to his defense. When you moralize instead of actually addressing the argument, it makes it really hard to move forward. And look, Baltimore does have problems. Mayor's corruption scandal further fuels Baltimore's cynicism about politics. How about this story? What The Wire got right. Corrupt politicians in Maryland. A corrupt mayor. How about this story? From April, Baltimore suffers after decades of mismanagement. We see it over and over again. And I'll tell you why this is. It should be very obvious to everybody. Ask yourself, why does the media chase after Trump's bombastic tweets? The ratings bump of Donald Trump from Forbes 2018. You've heard of the Trump bump. Bad stories about Trump do really, really well. I think at this point, Trump has really figured it out. So you have these big wins on immigration for Trump, and he wants to make sure the Democrats do two things: stay off message and don't fight back on the border front. So Trump gives, this string of tweets where he targets a Democrat, and he gives the media exactly what they want. They then claim everything he tweets is racist. Fine. They ignore the substance of what he's saying. People then come out. The argument ensues over Baltimore. And once again, Trump has successfully distracted the media from his actual policy victories. Well, there you have it. I'll end by saying this. I'm not trying to claim that in every single instance, when Trump says something, the media will play up to it. Or in every single instance, they will ignore what Bernie says. The media doesn't like Bernie either. They drag him all the time. They don't want him to win. The DNC doesn't want him to win. I'm not saying Bernie is invincible. I'm just saying you can clearly see there's something weird going on with the media. I don't think it's a grand conspiracy. I think it's just how our society reacts. Trump, we have a routine in play. So you'll probably find many examples of the media not criticizing Trump and criticizing Bernie. I'm just showing these particular examples to make a point that a lot of people are highlighting. Bernie Sanders has criticized these places too. Is that racist? No. Why? Because he wasn't mean about it? Is that really it? Let me know what you think. Stick around. The next segment will be coming up at 6 p.m. youtube.com/TimCastNews. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all next time.